I'm glad I was muted because my phone was ringing. All right, good morning. Sorry I was muted. So today I'm going to be discussing how to build an SMP case. So what is actually an SMP case? An SMP case is, here in the SMP world, it's called a complex interaction. Those are complaints of suspected Medicare fraud, waste, and abuse, consumer scams, anything seeking Medicare numbers or Social Security numbers. That's what the SMP complex interaction. So that is what an SMP case is. So what is an SMP referral? A referral is used in conjunction with a complex interaction, meaning that, a referral, it's a referral to me who actually handles the complex interactions, so that I can get the information needed in order for me to pass it on to the investigative entities, because I am not an investigator. So that's what a referral is. So generally, a complex interaction requires an SMP team member to obtain beneficiary information. And that's what I'm going to be discussing today, exactly what type of information I need to do a good complex interaction so I can pass it on to the investigative people. Normally it's the Office Inspector General who I pass on fraud referrals to, but it's just anybody that's going to be doing those investigations. It's just the information that I need in order to do a good SMP case. Of course, as you said, not all complex interactions involve a referral. Only the ones that actually need to be referred for investigation needs a referral. Unless you're doing like an error, if you're helping to resolve errors and things like that, that's still considered a complex interaction. It's just that I don't have to pass it on to the investigative people. So, and I know a lot of the a lot of you all counselors actually do help with the errors and things like that, helping them getting corrected where it's, like a coding error or a billing error, anything like that. You all help with that a lot. So, and you wouldn't, most of the time you don't forward those on to me unless you all have not gotten anywhere with those, just helping those out. So complex interaction or not a complex interaction. So what is a complex interaction or not a complex interaction? As a complaint that Medicare is too complicated is not considered a complex interaction. Consumer scams by themselves are not considered an SMP complex interaction unless it's Medicare involved. For example, those Social Security scams that's going around, they're calling claim to be from Social Security, that their number has been compromised, used in Texas or whatever. That's actually not a SMP issue. That's actually a Social Security issue. So it's really not a complex interaction for SMP. SMP only deals with Medicare. So if it's Medicare related, then it is a SMP interaction. So here's some examples that that I've dealt with before, and or some of y'all have actually helped me with. A report of potential error made by a provider in billing Medicare that the provider is unwilling to acknowledge or resolve. A beneficiary report's given out her Medicare number over the phone to someone claiming to be from Medicare. We get those all the time. Those scams. The scammers are calling people claiming to be from Medicare, asking about their pain, sending them braces in the mail. Getting that stuff over the phone. I'm getting a lot of that here lately. A report of Part C or Part D marketing violations. Believe it or not, I've gotten a lot of those here lately too, especially the Advantage plans where they're marketing people. We even had some insurance agents that went to one of the senior living facilities during the COVID-19 lockdown where no visitors were allowed, but yet there's 2 insurance agents that went into this one facility. So those, were definitely reported and are being investigated. Things like that, I get those all the time. Please, if you all know of any of those, please let me know. They're not supposed to be just showing up at these facilities like that. A beneficiary sees a charge on her explanation of benefit for a service she never received from a provider she doesn't know. Get those all the time. Sometimes, where, those scammers call and get their Medicare numbers over the phone. Especially here with the braces. Some of the braces, like, they'll get the boxes in the mail. Sometimes they don't get the boxes in the mail. Things like that. A representative from a senior housing complex reports residents are being offered money or gifts as incentives to utilize specific services or providers. Of course, that's a no-no. So, here's some examples that I've dealt with here lately. So, how to handle a complex interaction. To determine how to handle the complex interaction, it's including whether you should suspect an error versus fraud or abuse. You will need to collect a lot of information. That's the who, what, when, where, and why kind of, and I need detailed information, as much detail as you can get. Because this is, as much detail helps a lot, especially in maybe resolving the complaint or anything like that. Full names, I really need full names. So, and any other documentation that you all can collect. So we'll be going over that. So that's how we first start an investigation, is gathering the information. So what makes a good referral? As I said, the who, what, when, where, and why. So any attachments, actions or follow-up, make sure if you send me something, make sure you're only sending me the facts, because we cannot deal with hearsay. So it has to be factual, because you got to remember, we are dealing with almost like a criminal case. So you have to think of this. This is the start of investigation. So it has to be based on facts. So what do you gather when you're talking to a beneficiary? And you'll have to explain to them that you're going to be gathering as much information as you can so you can pass it on to me. So of course I need the beneficiaries, or if there's a different complaint person, for example, if it's a sibling, or if it's, one of their children, anybody like power of attorney, anything like that, I will need both of their informations, and specifically name, address, phone number, anything like that, so I can get in contact with them if I have any questions, or if the investigators need to contact them if they have any questions. So as much information, and I also need their date of birth, their Medicare numbers, anything and everything. The type of service that was, the type of coverage they have. Do they have Medicare? Do they have an Advantage plan? That's also very important, because it depends on where it goes as to what type of coverage they have. The service provider information, their name, their phone number, their address, all of that. Is there an appeal in the process? Because most of the time, if it's a denied service by Medicare, it's, not fraud. It really depends. So is there an appeal in the process? Was there an advanced beneficiary notice of non-coverage? Those services where, the providers are supposed to provide a ABN if they know that Medicare will not cover this. So if they have that, if they sign anything like that, that goes back to, it might not be fraud, but at least, all of that information is very helpful. So next thing, you got to actively listen to the beneficiary, ask them as many questions as you can. The who, what, when, where, and why definitely have to be answered. Make sure you understand the situation and the beneficiary's needs. So the actively listening comes in handy. So if you're helping do case notes, like if you're doing case notes or anything like that, it helps for me, if you send me case notes also on what you have already done. And we're talking detailed case notes. You know, when did you get the call, or when did you call them? What happened during that call? Um, you know, what did you say you were going to do? Anything and everything. So describe the situation, be objective and factual. Don't use the acronyms if you can, and record your actions of what you did, um, who you called, who you talked to, um, detailed. If you can write me out like a timeline, that would be really good, because that goes to show that one, you tried as a counselor, tried to correct the error in the first place. So they refuse. So you send it on to me. I can try to correct the error. If that doesn't work, then that gives us more ammunition to pass it on. So because we can say, well, the counselor and the SMP both tried to correct this, yet the provider was not willing. So here is all of our attempts. So it's very good for you to keep as detailed notes as you can, so that you can pass those on to me if need be. So why should you take time to build a case? It's our responsibility to the beneficiaries to help resolve these issues. It's also part of ACL's expectations. And also, it's also, as part of the SMP mission and the program, it's why we have to take time to build a good case. Also, when you're sitting down with a beneficiary, I need a release of information signed if you can. If you don't have one handy, I can always send them to them later. But it's not actually required, but it helps. It helps me to get in some places. For example, you got providers, sometimes they won't talk to you unless you have a release of information. So it helps me get into some areas. For example, if the beneficiary has been, if it's a QMB and they've been sent to collections, that release of information helps me talk to that collections company, because they know that I've got a release signed, that I'm the one helping resolve this issue. So those releases actually go a long way for me getting in places that it's been harder to, or would be hard to. So it's not required for me to make a referral for suspected fraud and abuse, but it is required if I'm going to be helping resolve an error or something like that. So it's I'm just, try to get a release of information if you can. If you're sitting with a volunteer, with a beneficiary in front of you. I said, if you can't, then I can always send them later and they can send it back to me. So any relevant attachments that I need, and this is anything and everything, the Medicare summary notices or the explanation of benefits, and I need a full copy of the whole thing, if at all possible. Like, I had a gentleman yesterday that he got caught up in that brace scam, and he sent me just the first copy of his MSN. That's it, the very first page. So I had to call him back and say, I need the full Medicare summary notice. Because, of course, on the first page, it just has, his name, the dates, and the service provider. That's it. It doesn't list all the different services or all the different braces he received. So now I'm having to wait longer to get that back. So if you can get the information up front, first and foremost, it helps me get the case to OIG faster, instead of me having to wait to get the documents. I said, but sometimes, most of the time, of course, now during COVID-19, we're not really doing face-to-faces, so we're having to do a lot over the phone. So I can understand it may take a while to gather all this info, gather all the attachments that I really need. But if you have anything and everything, it would be helpful. Another thing, business cards, brochures, anything, like if Advantage Plan agent comes to their door and gives them a business card if they don't have an appointment or anything like that. A copy of that business card is helpful. Also, what's very helpful is when did that agent, what date did that agent come? Anything and everything is helpful. Did they take notes while the agent was there? What did the agent tell them? If they took notes, a copy of those notes is helpful. Anything and everything, copies of bills, copies of anything and everything, doctor's orders, if they've been sent to collections, a copy of that bill, anything and everything is very helpful that we can attach to a referral. Of course, reading the MSN is very, very important. Did the beneficiary receive the service or not? Did their doctor actually order the service? Was the beneficiary billed for the same amount? So we've got to look at the MSN first. Did Medicare deny it? There's several different reasons why Medicare would have denied a claim. Is the charge or services related to the beneficiary's condition or treatment? And also, if you're sitting down with them, or if you've got their information, compare the MSN or EOB with the bill from the provider to make sure everything is up and up. For example, I had one beneficiary the other day call me because she thought it was fraud because a provider had billed her because she was in a motor vehicle accident and Medicare had denied the claim. So and Medicare denied it because you're supposed to actually submit those claims to the insurance provider, so it'd be the auto insurance instead of Medicare paying. So Medicare will not pay a claim if there is a third party biller, that like auto insurance, house insurance, any of those actually come first before Medicare. So a lot of beneficiaries do not realize that. So get clarifying documentation. I said make sure we've got as much factual information that we can get. If you have to help a beneficiary by reading their MSN to them, sometimes it's just taking because Medicare is very complicated and a lot of beneficiaries don't understand. Like, for example, a lot don't realize they have a Part A deductible that they have to meet. A lot don't realize any of the deductibles that they have to meet. Sometimes they don't realize Medicare does not pay for everything. Some of them don't realize that Medicare doesn't pay at 100%, that Medicare only pays at 80%. So sometimes it's just explaining or clarifying documentation to beneficiaries is very helpful, especially if the MSN and the bill all add up together. So it wouldn't necessarily be fraud. And don't forget, and I need copies of everything if we're going to send it on for fraud, if you really truly believe it is fraud. And it also helps, especially the bills, the copies of the bills. It helps me get the refund amount, for example, so I can claim that on my reports, because the ACL is keeping track of how much money we save. So I have to have a copy that the bill and then the corrected bill in order for me to claim those savings. So next thing we need to determine is who's going to take the next step. So you got your information gathered. The beneficiary, did the beneficiary need guidance? Most of those, either I or you as a volunteer can do that. Does the beneficiary need help making contact? I know there's a lot of beneficiaries that do not like making waves. They don't like calling their providers to make waves because they're afraid that they're going to, come back and not see them anymore, or you know, treat them badly or anything like that. So I know there's a lot of beneficiaries that do not like contacting their providers. So that's where we can come in. You know, you as a volunteer or me as SMP can help, you know, make contact with these providers if the beneficiaries do not feel comfortable. Next thing we need to decide, is this an error or suspected fraud? So if the beneficiary doesn't feel good about taking this up with their provider, then we will need to follow up with the provider to see if they're willing to correct that mistake. If they're not, then it kind of goes to show, if they're not willing to correct that mistake, then that's, they could be doing this to other beneficiaries in their practice. So that just tells me, there's something going on there. And keep in mind also, there is providers don't know sometimes that most of the time they actually outsource their billing and their coding. So the provider themselves may not know what is going on. But if you bring it to the provider's attention, most of the time that provider will get in contact with their billing provider or coding provider and correct that. So that's why it gets kind of hairy sometimes. Sometimes you're having to deal with the billing provider or the billing company that the provider is contracted with, or the coding company that the provider has contracted with. So just keep that in mind. You may not actually be dealing with the provider themselves if you're trying to correct an error. So of course, I said, if they're not willing to fix the mistake, that's when it may indicate suspected fraud or abuse. And I keep saying suspected. It's because it's all suspected cases of fraud or abuse until they get convicted. So it's still suspected until they're actually convicted of the case. So that's why I keep saying suspected. And of course, I tell Medicare beneficiaries, if they're having issues, instead of having to wait for their Medicare benefit or for their MSN to come in the mail, they can enroll in the mymedicare.gov account and see their claims in real time. So they can actually see it faster if they're willing, to do that. Of course, we do have a lot of beneficiaries out there that do not have like internet access, computers, or anything like that. So I do realize that. So, here's some basic steps for researching a beneficiary complaint. Determine the problem. What is the issue? Get an SMP release of information signed by the beneficiary. Request any copies and make sure that they are full copies. Full copies of everything. The MSN, because it doesn't help if I've just got a partial MSN. Anything, Medigap, insurance, what did the Medigap pay? So you need if they do have a Medigap, so you'll need both. You'll need the MSN, you'll need the Medigap, what did the Medigap pay? And then you will need like the bill. So request copies of everything. It's more to have more copies and I have to weed through than not enough, if that makes sense. Match the claims to the MSN and the bill to make sure that everything is up and up. Put it in chronological order if you can. And keep in mind, there is providers, they have 1 full year to send a claim to Medicare. If they do not send that claim to Medicare within that year, then it's on the provider. So, and then once you look through everything, determine if there's any other documentation that we might need for that referral. Anything and everything. I even look up business, the business, make sure that they have a business license. Depends on whatever state they're in. So I want to make sure they have a business license. Sometimes I'll look up their NPI numbers to make sure they have a Medicare, NPI number. So I look up I do a lot of research on the back end, just to make sure I've got everything up and up. Based on the information that you received, if you can call the provider, get it corrected, if you can use your backdoor Medicare number, that unique ID number. Sometimes you can get a lot of stuff done that way. Ivy's gotten, I know Ivy has been working with Medicare a lot here lately, especially with the agents who, were calling up people, or the Advantage plans were calling up people and signing them up for their plans. She's gotten several corrected that way, and also complained to Medicare regarding those. So keep in mind, you can do a lot with your unique ID number. Don't forget to log your volunteer hours, anything and everything that needs to be counted. Don't forget to count your travel time if you had to travel somewhere. Make sure you count everything. Like if you're having to fax it to me, how long that takes. Anything and everything. Make sure you're counting all of your time. If money is returned to the beneficiary or to Medicare, make sure I need that supporting documentation. A copy of the check. Like one got, who was on QMB, I got her refund from the ambulance company. So she sent me a copy of that check that she got from the ambulance company. So anything, or a corrected bill where it says they don't have a balance, or anything and everything to help me where I can claim that money, because I have to have like an initial bill, and I have to have a corrected, or any type of documentation showing that they've got money back or whatever, anything like that, a corrected MSN, anything like that, I would need a copy of, so I can claim those dollars. Of course, if you have any issues and you cannot get the issue resolved, please don't hesitate to call me and let me know. Send everything to me. I will try my best to get it corrected. And then if I can't get it corrected, then I will definitely send it on to where it needs to be. And it depends on what type of issue it is as to where I send it. But please don't hesitate to call me, or if you have you're stuck on, you don't know what next step to do, anything like that, please don't hesitate to call me, email me, anything. I'm available for every one of y'all. So working with a provider, some tips on working with providers. Is the billing error something that the provider can correct? Or like I said, some providers outsource their billing, so you may have to talk to the billing company that the provider has contacted with. Sometimes if you call the provider and let them know, hey, your billing company has billed this incorrectly, most of the time providers are willing to go ahead and say, hey, I will call that billing company and get it corrected. Or talk to the office manager, instead of the doctor himself, the office manager or their nurse. Someone in that office might be willing to help call the billing company and say, hey, you have billed this incorrectly. Because sometimes the provider doesn't know what the billing company is doing. So just keep that in mind. Has the beneficiary ever been sent to collections? Because if they have pretty much already been sent to collections, then we'll have to start working with that collection company and not the provider, because pretty much the provider has pretty much closed their whatever. So we have to start working with the collections company. So most of the time when I work with the collections company and say, hey, this person, for example, if it's a QMB and they've balance billed that QMB, I will call the collection company using the release of information that I have, because most of the time the collection companies will not talk to me unless I have that release of information. So I have to call them, get their fax, so I can fax them that release of information. And most of the time when I also do that, I fax them a letter that I have typed up where the beneficiary is claiming that they do not owe that debt because they are QMB. And most of the time I will fax like their Medicare card to them, or a copy of their QMB card to let that collection company know that, that the billing company or provider has balance billed that the individual, which means they are actually violating a federal law. And once the collection company usually gets all that, they'll send it back to the provider and say, hey, you're billing this correctly. You're not supposed to be billing this. So it works really good as long as I have that release of information. So that's why it's very important to have that piece of information. But, and again, that's why I'm telling you some of the tips that if you have to work with a collection company, this is what you need. They have to have a release of information first. So please, you can use that release of information. Or if you do not have that release of information, please let me know. If you all have, if y'all been trained by me in person, most of you has that release of information because I put that in your packet. But I can email it out to Ryan, and maybe Ryan can send it all out to everyone on the call today just to make sure you have that. But the release of information is very critical in those. So another thing, is the provider willing to bill according to Medicare's rules? You know, if the provider's willing to correct that. Is the provider's behavior, you know, strange? I had one provider one time and say, well, this is how we have always done it. But even though I was telling the provider that they've been billing it incorrectly, they were saying, well, this is how we've always done it. Or, you know, I'm not going to change how we bill. This is, you know, this is how it's supposed to be billed. Anything like that, just stop with the provider, because we don't want to get into a, you know, fight or whatever with the provider. So that's when you need to just pass it on to me so I can send it on to, you know, the correct investigative people. Another thing, have you received any other complaints or errors regarding this provider? For example, I had this one certain provider that would continually and balance bill QMBs. I mean, it was a continual thing. I had already had enough because I had to, you know, keep calling this same provider over and over. And I was like, look, this is your last one. This is your last warning. If I get another complaint, I am reporting you to OIG. I said, because I have told you all numerous times you cannot balance bill QMBs. And they kept doing it. So I reported them. I sent them on to OIG because I had had enough with the, you know, with the correcting their errors. So I don't know whatever happened to that complaint. I don't know if Medicare came down on them, but after I did that complaint, I never got another QMB complaint from them ever again. So just thought I'd let y'all know. If you keep getting something from the same, an error or something from the same provider, sometimes we have to take it up higher. Of course, you know, it depends on which plan as to who you call. If you have to use, if they're on original Medicare, you can use your SHIP unique ID to get to 1-800 Medicare. Don't forget, we've got a different phone number. We've got that special phone number that we can use. Now it's harder for SHIP to get into the Part C and Part D plans because they're private. A lot of the Advantage plans will not talk to you, and I've had some will, and there's some that will not. Even with your using your unique ID, they will not talk to you. Some will if you have that release of information signed. Some I've been able to, you know, send that release of information to them. There is some where we've had to do like a 3-way call where we had to get me, the beneficiary, you know, and the plan all on the phone at the same time. So you got to do what you got to do to get, you know, if you can. Sometimes it just, you have to tell the beneficiary that they will have to call their Advantage plan themselves. So sometimes we have to do a 3-way call. It depends on the Advantage plan, and all of them are all different. Some will shut you down completely. They don't want to release some information or anything like that. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes the beneficiary may have to do it on their own if we're working with a Advantage plan or prescription drug plan. So perform any additional research if needed. Did they sign an advance beneficiary notice of non-coverage? Can you get a copy of that from the provider? Did they do any? Did Medicare deny something? Have they filed an appeal? Get a copy of that paperwork if you can. Is there a coordination of benefits issue? For example, if we're dealing with insurance, different insurance companies, for example, auto insurance, auto insurance will pay first before Medicare, something like that, coordination of benefits. For example, I had one where the couple was in an auto accident. The providers all billed Medicare, and then that insurance company actually paid Medicare back, if that makes any sense. So they paid Medicare back from that settlement that they got from that auto insurance or that auto accident. So sometimes it works that way. So one, is it a coordination of benefits issue? So of course, if it is, you might have to call that, the coordination of benefits to see what the issue might be. Sometimes there's issues with, if it's a coordination of benefit issue, for example, if, they fell at somebody's house or whatever, somebody else's house, and they broke their hip or something, and that homeowner's insurance from the other person's house is going to be covering their medical bills, but then they get so that's all correct and whatnot, yet then they go in for I don't know, they've been having headaches or something like that. That's nothing to do with the fall at this other person's house. They didn't hit their head or anything like that. But then they, any other issues that not related to that fall. Sometimes there's a mix up at the coordination of benefits and they don't take that tag off from other conditions. So Medicare denies it because of that. Sometimes you have to call the coordination of benefits and say, well, this symptom right here should be covered because it had nothing to do with the fall or nothing to do with a broken hip, anything like that. So anything like you might have to deal with the coordination of benefits, and most of the time you can actually use your unique ID to deal with the coordination of benefits, and they're really good to work with. They can answer your questions. Other Medicare coverage databases, like sometimes it helps to do research on, what does Medicare cover? What all is required for Medicare to cover that? Sometimes they have to have pre-existing things, in order for Medicare to cover that, or they have to have like a X-ray before the Medicare will cover an MRI, or anything like that. So sometimes you have to look up the policies and procedures or the local coverage determinations to see, why it's not covered or anything like that. So it does take a lot of research sometimes. So suspected fraud or abuse. Most complaints of suspected healthcare fraud, errors, and abuse received by me arise after a healthcare service has been provided or a bill or statement has been received, of course. So if, is the suspected error not resolvable at the provider level, then definitely refer it to me. Have you ruled out error? Is there a pattern of errors? Definitely send that all to me. Because actually errors, if you think it's abuse, can actually turn into fraud, especially if they're not going to correct it. So pretty much here is my flow chart that ACL gives me as to, where I send a referral to. Of course, if it's fraud, it mainly goes to the OIG. Compromised Medicare numbers, there's scammers out there telling, asking about their pain, and beneficiaries are giving their Medicare number out over the phone. The only one that can actually request a new Medicare number is the beneficiary themselves. So you would have to say, tell them, and sometimes they've actually called Medicare already, but they didn't request a new number. I have to tell them to call back to Medicare and say, okay, tell Medicare your number has been compromised and to request a new Medicare number. Because I have to tell them, I said, I can't do that myself. Medicare is actually requiring them that the beneficiary has to do that themselves. Or somebody that's POA can actually do that, or something like that. Okay, so here is my list of my flow chart of referrals, and where they may go. Of course, I talked to you about those agents that actually went to the assisted living or the senior living facility during the COVID-19 lockdown. I actually referred those to 2 different places. One, I referred them to my CMS in Atlanta. And then I also referred them to the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance. And that Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance actually assigned them an investigator because he emailed me the other day. So sometimes I have to do 2 parts to those referrals. But hey, it gets stuff done. So how do I track, a complex interaction is actually tracked in, my database SIRS. So that's why I need as much information that I can get. So I have to do case notes, and I have to enter those case notes into SIRS, and that's pretty much a breakdown of factual information of what was done when and what is next. And that's also tracked. That's why I have to. That's why I put all the documentation that's actually scanned and put into SIRS. Anytime I make a referral to anybody, is put in SIRS. Of course, the resolution is actually put in SIRS. If I've saved money, if I got money back, anything like that is actually tracked in SIRS. So that's why it's very important. I cannot count any dollars saved unless I have proof that it was saved. For example, the check, a copy of the check, corrected bill. So I have to have the before and after, if that makes sense, in order for me to collect, to count that. Sometimes it's very hard to get that information. Of course, the Office Inspector General, I do my referrals to them. It's pretty much a check box in SIRS where it says send this complaint to OIG, and I check a box, which sends them. So it sends ACL I guess email that I have submitted a referral to OIG. ACL and OIG is actually in the same building. I think in the same, might be in the same floor, I don't know. But ACL will look at that and then they will walk it over to OIG for me. So that's why I need as much detailed information as I can get. So of course, once it goes to the OIG, I don't know what happens after that. So it's reviewed by the OIG. They, could open a case for investigation. It could be sent anywhere after that. And keep in mind, and I have to tell beneficiaries this, once it's sent to OIG, OIG cannot follow up with beneficiaries or complaints on the status of any case. OIG may call a beneficiary and ask them, but OIG will not tell them. They may ask them questions about the case, but they will not tell them the status of the case. So keep that in mind, because I know a lot of beneficiaries will call me back and say, hey, what's happening? And I have to tell them, I do not know. Once it's out of my hands, once it's sent to OIG, it's out of my hands. I do not know the status of the case. So how do I get credit on the OIG report? I said that's why I need those copies of everything, and then I need a documentation showing the correction, zero balance, anything. That's how I get. And keep in mind, 1-800 Medicare will not provide me any documentation. They will. Sometimes I can call 1-800 Medicare and ask them for an MSN or corrected MSN, but they will not send it to me. they will send it to the beneficiary. So keep that in mind. So I always have to go back to the beneficiary and ask them, did you get anything correct? Did you get a corrected bill? Did you get anything in the mail so I can show a zero balance or your money back or anything? Of course, the value of the SMP program goes beyond the ability to document dollars. So that's what I'm saying. It's not just about the dollars saved. Sometimes it's, beneficiaries' peace of mind or anything like that, knowing that, it's sent on. Documentation may be difficult or impossible to obtain, and that's okay. If I can't get it, I can't get it. I don't count how much dollars I have saved. I mean, it's really good. It does show that, we've done the work, but I really don't count on it. If I can't get, I don't worry about it too much. I don't drain on it. And it's because I have to rely on the outside entities to obtain that documentation. But if I can't get it, I can't get it. I don't worry the beneficiaries about it. And that, with you all, it's very hard for me to work the whole state by myself, especially taking all the referrals I do. And that's why I want to thank all the volunteers for everything that you all do in helping me with some of these cases. Some of you do the errors and stuff like that. I thank you all for doing that for me. That helps me out a whole lot. Just if you all get any sticky situations, just let me know. I'm here to back you all up, and I want to thank you all for backing me up. So, and thank you all for listening to this webinar today. So now I'm pretty much done. So I'm just going to take some questions. Okay.
Lonnie, we did have one question that came in. In the case of uninsured drivers or other uninsured accidents, would Medicare pay?
It depends. Like if whoever was driving, I think if they the car that they were in, if it was not that other driver's fault, or that it depends on whose fault it was, I think. If it was, sometimes people have the uninsured driver added on to their insurance policies. So it would be that insurance policy that would pay instead of and then that insurance company would go after the driver. It really depends. If Medicare knows that there was like an auto accident involved, I said sometimes Medicare will go ahead and pay, and then that insurance company will reimburse Medicare for what Medicare paid because it comes out of the settlement. It depends on the case, I think. Some, especially if the providers have tried to bill, like sent the bills to the insurance company and the insurance company have, not paid or something like that, then the providers will go ahead and submit it to Medicare with documentation that they tried to get it from the insurance company first. It really depends. That's one of those coordination of benefits things that you would just have to talk to them first. It's a very hard question to answer. I said some policies have the uninsured driver. Some do, some don't. It really depends.
Yeah, and if it was ruled, sort of a no fault accident, yes, there's a fair chance that Medicare would pay in that case, but they will always try to default towards a secondary payer, meaning look for your auto insurance to either reimburse them or pay primary to that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. If anybody else has any more questions, please feel free to put them down into the chat, but I'm not seeing any other questions at this moment.
You can unmute yourself and ask. Okay. No questions? Anybody?
No.
Anybody want to talk about some of their experiences of where they've, gotten errors corrected and things like that? Anyone?
Well, Lonnie, I'll go ahead and stop the
Okay.
recording, and then it may be, if anybody feels comfortable talking about those things not on recorded, then you can feel free to express that here. And